Hey, everybody. It is Thursday, May 16th, as we like to call it here on the pod. It's Friday Eve. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, typically portrait unveilings for a royal family member, not much ado about them, pretty traditional. King Charles, though, has gone a different direction.
If you have not seen the picture, let's just say there's a lot of red. It's like red on red.
And there's a butterfly. Don't forget the butterfly.
You know those old photos that used to be like you'd have to squint your eyes to find the 3D image that would pop out? Yeah. That's kind of what it reminds me of. You're like, wait a minute, is that King Charles in there somewhere? And then you're like, oh yeah, that is him.
Jill, certainly an interesting take here. And obviously we're on a podcast here, so we have to describe it to you, but it's over on our Instagram page, and it has gotten a flurry of comments, many of them not very positive. They went with a modern take here. It's like a typical portrait. He sat down apparently several times for it, but then they tried a modern flair by putting this red all over him. And people are saying, looks like he's coming out of a fire. Some comparing it to the haunted painting in Ghostbusters. And so it's certainly gotten a lot of critique with this modern attempt here. If you're ever at the White House or the National Portrait Gallery and you look at presidential portraits, they're all very traditional. The president standing at a desk, sitting at a desk, etc. Until Obama suddenly has like greenery behind him. And so I remember that, causing a bit of a stir a few years ago when the Obama portrait unveiling, he's standing in front of a bush or, he's outside for the first time. People are like, this is different. This King Charles portrait, though, takes things to a new level. And so interesting because, the royal family is so traditional. So the fact that, he's going, this sort of comes out of left field for someone like King Charles.
I'm looking at some of the comments on the post on the Instagram account, and somebody wrote, it's giving red wedding, which I get that. A nod to Game of Thrones, of course. All right, let's get to some headlines here. Moshe, get the debate bingo card ready. President Biden and former President Trump, not even the official presidential nominees yet, have agreed to 2 debates, including one next month. Overseas, what we know about the assassination of Slovakia's prime minister.
All right, so only use this if he's dead.
To the economy, U.S. inflation slowed in April, providing a glimmer of hope. We're going to break down what's more expensive and where prices are finally slowing down. In a grim milestone, U.S. overdose deaths topped 100,000 for the 3rd straight year, but some progress has actually been made. We'll tell you about it. Secretary of State Blinken plays some guitar as part of his latest diplomatic trip to Ukraine, to some mixed reviews. In streaming news, Netflix will be broadcasting 2 NFL games on Christmas this year, but not everyone's on board. And Uber is rolling out a bunch of new services like airport shuttles and discounts for students. Moshe, you were at their big event yesterday.
Yes, we'll have a full recap of some of the new... we'll have a full recap of all things happening at Uber.
And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, a big day for the Nickel and Top Gun, and I will give you some fun trivia related to both. Like, did you know that Tom Cruise was not their first choice to play Maverick? I'll tell you who it was.
What? All right, Moshe, I am going to stay and listen to the end of this podcast.
Jill, it's a job requirement.
Okay, mark your calendar. We have got a debate. Actually, we've got 2 of them. President Biden and former President Trump have agreed to one-on-one in-person debates. The first hosted by CNN on June 27th, and then a second debate in September hosted by ABC. By the way, neither party has actually had its national convention yet to formally pick the candidates, but both men are what we call the presumptive nominee for their parties, having already won the majority of delegates in primaries. A debate in June, though, is still very early for a general election campaign, since, again, nominees aren't formalized until the conventions, which are over the summer. And Moshe, we started Wednesday morning, like every day before it, not sure whether we would even get a presidential debate. And then in what seemed to be playing out before our eyes on social media in just a matter of hours, 2 debates confirmed. Of course, there were some back channel conversations going on before that. Now, this started, though, at least publicly, when Biden said he would not participate in the fall presidential debates sponsored by the nonpartisan commission that has organized them for more than 3 decades, since 1988. Instead, he suggested that the media directly organize the debates with the nominees. He put out a social media post saying, let's do it on a Wednesday. It was a bit of a cheeky nod to Trump's hush money trial, which is happening now in New York City because there is no court on Wednesdays.
Yeah, it sort of had this old school Clint Eastwood, John Wayne feel to it. Jill on Wednesday morning put up this video being like, hey there, I'm ready to face off against you. As part of what would become this flurry of social media activity over 4 hours yesterday.
Right. Trump then wrote on his Truth Social site that he was ready and willing to debate Biden.
Jill, he did make a point beyond that to put in all caps that crooked Joe Biden is the worst debater of all time, with an all caps weak foreign policy, and said, I think he refers to him as crooked 5 times in the Truth Social post before saying, let's get ready to rumble, !
Needless to say, the media outlets jumped on the opportunity. CNN got the June debate, both men again taking to social media, Biden saying he accepted and adding, over to you, Donald. Trump wrote, as you said, Moshe, let's get ready to rumble. Soon after that, they agreed to the ABC debate in September. Biden wrote on Twitter, or X, Trump says he'll arrange his own transportation. I'll bring my plane too. I plan on keeping it for another 4 years. Sick burn, Moshe.
The irony is it's Air Force One. Trump actually does have his own plane.
But what this shows, Moshe, I think, is that both Trump and Biden believe that a debate, that a televised one-on-one debate will actually be to their own benefit. Trump wrote on Truth Social, Biden is the worst, in caps, worst debater that I have ever faced, and that he can't put 2 sentences together. And as the New York Times' Maggie Haberman points out, she says this is the same error that Trump made in 2020, setting expectations incredibly low for Biden ahead of the first debate, during which Trump, sweating profusely, seemed off while Biden performed steadily. Moshe, what a morning. Democracy in action. But a lot we still do not know, however, about how this is all going to go down.
Yeah, they still have to finalize details and logistics, topics, anchors. They all have opinions on that. Though clearly here, enough happened via back channel talks here to make this proceed pretty quickly, right? This back and forth they had over a few hours on social media. Clearly their staff, their aides, had sort of set things in motion here for this to happen. Now, to your point, they both think this benefits them, right? We talked earlier this week about the polling that Biden's facing, but then inside the White House, they say the polls are nonsense. They don't believe the polls. But you probably don't agree to a debate in June, like immediately, unless enough of you believes in the White House that you might be in trouble if you're Joe Biden. Remember, if you have a massive advantage, you have no reason to put yourself out there for a debate. You're coming up there in years. And look at Trump, right? Trump didn't debate in the Republican primaries because he was so far ahead of them. He's like, why should I commit an unforced error and elevate my opponent? So in this case, Trump sees an opportunity to show that Biden isn't all there. Biden sees an opportunity to make Trump look extreme and to show that he's not all there. And so we'll see what happens here with this soon debate. I mean, we're talking about 5-6 weeks away, Jill, this first debate before this September debate. Now, it will be interesting. This is sort of a throwback of sorts. The last time I remember a TV studio debate with no audience, you have to go back to Kennedy Nixon, 1960. It happened in the CBS studios initially in Chicago, and then another CBS studio where they had that original Kennedy Nixon debate. Now, notably, that had no audience, right? It was just the two of them in a studio. The more modern format comes about in the 80s. So you have that 1960 debate, but there's no debate in 64, none in 68, none in 72. Finally, a debate happens between Ford and Carter in 76. Then you see Carter and Reagan in 80. But they were having issues between the candidates organizing this. So what happens? They create this Commission on Presidential Debates, this nonpartisan commission that has been organizing them. And since 88, we've had this format of 3 presidentials, 1 VP. One of the presidentials is a town hall meeting. One of the presidentials focuses on foreign policy. And that has remained the format here. Now, albeit there have been criticisms of the commission, even their set and some of their, the format does feel antiquated by modern times. And Trump has had his issues with the commission. Biden has had his issues with the commission. And so they have cut the commission out. What's wild, Jill, the commission apparently had a Zoom a couple days ago where they're like, we haven't heard from the candidates, but we're feeling pretty good about the fall. And they had chosen the universities that were going to have the debate, and they thought this was all going to go down. And it turns out that Biden and Trump had their own plans here. Notably, with this early debate, guess who's not invited? RFK Jr. Neither man wants RFK Jr. on the stage. They both now see in polling that he's taking votes from both of them. And there's a threshold here that CNN's created that's similar to the commission, which is you need to be on the ballot to achieve 270 electoral votes. RFK's on the ballot in like a handful of states. He's not anywhere near 270. You also need a 15% polling threshold. He's hit 16% in one poll, but nonetheless doesn't meet all the qualifications. They've also thrown out here one VP debate. The proposed timeline from Biden is that it happens between the conventions this summer. Republicans go first in Milwaukee. Democrats go second in Chicago. The proposed timeline is a debate somewhere in between, which would have Vice President Harris and then whoever Trump chooses. And so we'll see if that happens. That isn't formalized here. But Jill, pretty remarkable that this appears to be happening, and that this went down relatively quickly, and that they're cutting out the commission for the first time in 3 decades, and that both men here think this will help them. So it'll be very interesting to see the approach each of them takes. Tactically, Trump had the interrupting thing, didn't work out for him. Does he try the rope-a-dope strategy of just letting Biden potentially mumble his own words? Who is the moderator? Do they follow up? Do they fact check? Is there a bell? I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot.
Do they cut mics?
Do they cut mics? Do they walk towards each other? Are they behind podiums? Are they sitting at a table?
Come on, man.
Come on, man. Let me finish. Throw back to 2020.
Will there be a fly? I know that's the vice president, but that is the highlight of that debate, the Pence debate.
I mean, listen, it's sort of like a week before July 4th. We'll also see who's paying attention. I think that, there'll be a lot of curiosity because the ratings have always been very high in the fall because you're a couple of weeks away from the election. So for the most part, people in the fall have been like, all right, 2 weeks from the election, I should probably watch and see which of these guys I should vote for. June 27th, 4.5 months before Election Day, is that, how well will that rate? And the way that modern media works is the vast majority of people will likely consume it via social media in clips. So it's very interesting, and you've seen this among some politicians in recent years in debates, is that in the debate itself, if you actually watch it, you might be like, that's kind of weird that they're saying it like that, or they're repeating themselves, or it just isn't, it doesn't fully make sense. But when you see it in clip form on TikTok and Instagram, you're like, oh, that politician was saying it that way for the purposes of a viral social media clip. Now, I don't know how savvy social media.
Our 77-year-old and 81-year-old nominees.
Trump will be 78. His birthday's coming up in a couple weeks. But yes.
Oh, I know. It's my birthday.
Oh, you share a birthday with Trump. I forgot about that. Anyway, this will be fascinating to watch. And by the way, even here's another thing. Even if one candidate does something, or one candidate clearly wins that debate, will that matter 4 months later? The way that our memories work and the way the news cycle works these days. Ultimately things move so quickly, so that September debate might matter more. A lot could happen between now and then.
Well, I'm just happy that there is a debate on the books.
Jill didn't have anything to do on the evening of June 27th, so her docket is full. Jill, you know what that means? You're going to stay up late with me, so we do a late night podcast record.
It starts at 9 p.m., by the way.
I know, Jill.
That's late.
For you. For you, it's late.
Okay, heading overseas now, Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, was shot multiple times in an assassination attempt after a government meeting on Wednesday. He is in life-threatening condition in a hospital. The shooting took place after an off-site government meeting. A suspect was apprehended at the scene. That is according to Slovakia's president. A suspect was apprehended at the scene. Fico won a third term as Slovakian prime minister last October. He ran ran a campaign that criticized Western support for Ukraine. Now, at least as of this recording, local police are not saying all that much about what happened. Video from the scene showed the attacker standing with other people behind a barrier and then shooting at the prime minister at short range when he came to greet people in the crowd. There has been widespread condemnation from Slovak and other European officials. Moshe, what do we know about Fico?
So he's a fixture in Slovak politics. You know, if you've been following that part of the world in Slovakia, this is his third term as prime minister. He served various times over the last couple decades. He actually started out on the political left, but has increasingly embraced right-wing views on immigration and cultural issues in recent years. And everyone thought he was done in 2018, but he ended up returning for elections last fall. What happens in 2018? Well, there was public outrage over the killing of a journalist who was investigating ties between Fico's associates and the Italian mafia. Lo and behold, that journalist was killed. Many people in Slovakia blame him for that assassination, that he was somehow involved in it. But he ends up making a comeback in the last year or two. He has been leveraging skepticism about the war in Ukraine. He's gotten close to Putin, who, by the way, put out a statement, saying that he's praying for him and outraged by the shooting. There's also been frustrations when it comes to the economy in Slovakia. So he's been involved here. So he's really been pushing that issue. He's also aligned himself with nearby Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in opposing aid to Ukraine, in challenging opinions within the EU. And so that's a bit of his politics here. Now, regardless of his politics, there's been outrage and condemnation around the world. President Biden calling this a horrific act of violence, saying the U.S. Embassy is able to help. Leaders from the EU across the board expressing shock here. And so we're still awaiting more details. There has been a press conference in recent hours by the Minister of Interior, who did say that the assassination attempt was politically motivated. And so we'll wait to hear more on that front.
Time now for the speed read. Let's start with some economic news from Politico. The latest consumer price index report out this morning was fairly meh, showing that inflation was 3.4% annually in April. But after some worryingly stubborn readings earlier this year, the dip from 3.5% in March amounted to a slight sigh of relief for policymakers. The Labor Department data showed that core inflation, which means they strip out food and energy, fell to 3.6%, which is its lowest mark in 3 years. And that helped ease concerns after the past 3 months of reports. But it's still only a very small positive indicator, and it's not likely to trigger rate cuts from the Fed, at least until late in the year. Housing is the thorn in the economy's side right now. Even as price increases have stopped outright for food, for example, high rents are still driving a lot of inflation.
Jill, is that the new official term from the Fed? The report was meh?
I saw it in Politico, and I loved everything about it. So I just kept it.
All right. So now moving forward, folks, when we have the monthly inflation report, it's either great, it's terrible, or new status, meh.
Meh.
So we have a few economic reporters that we follow. One of them is Heather Long from the Washington Post, who breaks down inflation, impact here, what changes, and, And one of the things that's really notable here, Jill, car insurance prices through the roof, super high here, part of this overall inflation rate. And then you have rent and gas. They account for 70% of the April inflation number. And so those are two things that impact many of us. And is the reason people feel the pinch. We were talking about the politics of all of this and the Biden administration, the Biden White House talking about how the economy's on the move and, unemployment is still down, et cetera. But inflation, people really feel. And one of the things to really look at is not these month by month numbers, not even year over year numbers, but over the last 4 years. 4 years is crucial because, a presidency is 4 years, but also it gives you a sense of time and why people feel the way they do. So here's inflation since February of 2020, over the last 4 years. Groceries are up 25%, meaning what you paid $100 for 4 years ago, you pay $125 for today. Shelter is up 22%. Car insurance up 46%. And energy up 36%. We should note, we shouldn't just focus on the increases. There's also decreases. Airfare as of today versus 4 years ago, down 1%. Jill, we put up a chart care of Yahoo Finance over on the Instagram account, and it's fascinating. Rental cars down, toys down, appliances down. And then, those are what's down, but then everything else that's up: housing, restaurant meals, earnings, transportation, medical care, education, alcohol, recreation, clothing. Anyway, you get the point.
From the Washington Post, overdose deaths have surpassed 100,000 for the third straight year. This is according to federal data out on Wednesday. And it is a reminder that this country remains mired in an intractable epidemic fueled by the potent street drug fentanyl. According to initial CDC data, just over 107,000 people died from an overdose in 2023. That is actually a slight decrease of about 3% from the previous year. The agency described it as the first annual decrease in deaths since 2018, although experts caution that the numbers could rise in ensuing years and that the death toll is still unacceptably high. One health expert calls it a partial victory and suspects that the numbers, unfortunately, will climb.
Yeah, Jill, if we put this into context here, we're still at more than double where America was in 2016, which really accounts for the influx of fentanyl. When you look at the numbers, more than 70,000 of the 107,000 overdose deaths, about 3/4 there, due to fentanyl, which makes drugs much more addictive. But in many cases, these drug gangs putting together these drugs and smuggling them across the border, the cartels are putting too much fentanyl in, leading to these deaths. The CDC on Wednesday describing the decrease as a sign, they say, again, we're only down 4,000 year over year, that federal efforts to help prevent deaths and treat addiction are paying off. The CDC saying in a statement, the progress over the last 12 months should make us want to reinvigorate our efforts, knowing that our strategies are making a difference. Still, Jill, we've heard from so many in the mo.news community who have been impacted by this and sadly had loved ones who have lost their lives due to overdoses. Beyond the politics and stats, the stories of those killed by drugs in 2023 have outraged communities, anguished families. We told you about the 1-year-old boy who died accidentally ingesting fentanyl at a New York daycare, 5 members of a small indigenous tribe in Washington state who died in 1 week. A number of people in a Texas border county recently who all died of a fentanyl-related overdose. One notable thing beyond fentanyl, the CDC is seeing an increase in deaths related to meth and cocaine, underscoring what many are seeing now. There's an increased use of stimulants alongside opioids. So still a ways to go here, despite the top line number seeing a slight decline from 2022.
So Moshe, as you know, I am sponsoring an independent project for 2 girls that are in high school. They're seniors in high school, and I work with them for the past couple of weeks, and they send us stories that are on their radar, which is fascinating because they are a totally different demographic than we are. They're 17 years old. And one of the stories that they're always talking about actually is fentanyl. They say it is everywhere. They say they've heard stories and know people who have died from laced drugs. Yeah. And so they are constantly pushing, stories out about it because they say, they believe in telling as many of these stories as possible just to reinforce the danger of fentanyl in their lives. I mean, in everybody's lives, but pretty scary, just when you're at that age where
you might be experimenting.
Exactly. And you just don't know what is in these drugs.
Yeah,
it's frightening.
It's a different era from when we were going to high school and college, and you were to party, and you make whatever decisions you're going to make. But I don't remember being 20 or 21 being like, if I try this, I might die. Whereas that is certainly the case now, due to the concerns of fentanyl, which was, again, not an issue 2 decades ago. This has been a serious issue that the U.S. is addressing with Mexico. The U.S. is addressing with China, where many of the elements of fentanyl come. They're then shipped to Mexico, then incorporated into drugs by the drug cartels, and then shipped across the border. So this issue being felt here and having a huge impact when it comes to foreign policy as well.
From NBC News, during a surprise visit to Kyiv, Ukraine, Secretary of State Antony Blinken took the stage alongside a local band and played Neil Young's Rockin' in the Free World. The 62-year-old Secretary of State started with a few words to the crowd at a legendary speakeasy-style venue that was in a basement in downtown Kyiv. He said, I know this is a really, really difficult time. Your soldiers, your citizens, particularly in the Northeast in Kharkiv are suffering tremendously, but they need to know, you need to know, the United States is with you. They are fighting not just for a free Ukraine, but for the free world. And then he jammed out. Take a listen. Moshe, I hate saying anything negative about it because I give him credit for doing it. I feel like his heart was in the right place. The singing may have been a little weird. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So it's well known that Blinken plays guitar, plays in a band, as you know, aside from trying to deal with war around the world and all of his various trips dealing with the Palestinians and the Israelis and the Ukrainians and the Russians and the Mexicans. And anyway, his docket is full, but clearly he finds some relief in music here. Notable that he decided to do it during this trip to Ukraine. This is not a completely direct comparison, but what it immediately reminded me of as he gives a serious speech about, being with you for Ukraine. Now let me jam for you. It reminds me of this press conference that George W. Bush does in the months after 9/11, where he's on the golf course. He's playing golf. And let me just play the clip for everybody.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
So not a completely fair comparison. I don't know, just reminded me of that serious foreign policy talk. And now we're going to play guitar. Now we're going to play golf. Notably, by the way, when after Bush did that, he got so much criticism. He stopped playing golf after 9/11 and the war in Iraq because people said it was insensitive to the fact, especially as American troops were abroad fighting there. Now, as for the performance itself, mixed reviews. Some very positive, and certainly got some positive reaction on our Instagram account. Some people down on it. Apparently, Blinken's guitar was out of tune. And then there are people who thought his choice of song was interesting here. Some saying he's misinterpreting what free world is really about in the Neil Young song. Donald Trump, by the way, plays the song as a patriotic anthem. If you actually look at the lyrics of Neil Young's intention, it was actually a reference to America's failings, including homelessness and gun crime, despite the sort of top line chorus there. And Ukrainians are split. Some very happy to have the Secretary of State there. Others critical of the fact that it took months to get this newest tranche of aid their way, the $60 billion in military aid. Congress had it held up for more than half a year here until Republicans finally passed it through. So some Ukrainians here are saying too little, too late. Less guitar, more aid.
From ESPN, Netflix says that it will air 2 NFL games on Christmas Day this season and at least one game on Christmas each of the next 2 years. No matchups for the Christmas Day games were revealed prior to the full 2024 schedule release Wednesday night, but the 4 teams involved this year will play rare Wednesday regular season contests. Netflix says there are no live annual events, sports or otherwise, that compare with the audiences that NFL football attracts. We are so excited that the NFL's Christmas Day games will be only on Netflix. So, Moshe, there's definitely been some backlash to this.
Yeah, the feeling is that the football game on Christmas Day should be free, should be on network TV, available to you as it has been for years on the CBS or Fox or NBC. This will be the first time Netflix has aired an NFL game, and they'll head over to streaming. There was a lot of memes and criticism online being like, how am I going to teach my parents how to find the NFL game on Christmas Day? The NFL, though, says that The NFL says that Christmas has become a tradition, and to partner with Netflix, a service whose biggest day of the year is this holiday, is the perfect combination to grow this event globally for NFL fans. All right, Jill. So we'll await more details here. People may have their critiques, but ultimately we know that streamers are trying to get into NFL and other sports to bring in live viewers. So the big question will be, what will the theme music be? They now need a composer for the NFL on Netflix because there's so many of these iconic NFL tunes. Needless to say, those are the theme songs that Netflix now has to think about as they get a composer to, it's got to feel big and grand and it's Christmas. So what are they going to do? And that was my initial thought as I thought about like, a new network gets the NFL. Well, what's going to be their opening music?
All right, and sticking with tech and business from Bloomberg, Uber is launching shuttle bus services to and from airports, concert venues, and sports stadiums. The delivery company separately announced that Costco is joining as a grocery partner on its delivery platform, Uber Eats. Until now, same-day Costco delivery was only available via rival Instacart. For its shuttle service, Uber is going to be working with local fleet providers who employ commercially licensed drivers and facilitate the bookings at a fraction of the price of its usual Uber X rideshare service. In addition to offering shuttle services at airports, it will provide them at certain Live Nation entertainment concert venues in the U.S. this summer, and at Miami's Hard Rock Stadium, where Taylor Swift will be performing later this year as part of her blockbuster Eras tour. Vehicle capacity will range from 14 to 55 seats. Customers can book and pay for their rides as many as 7 days in advance, which means there's no risk of surge pricing. Uber shuttle service and the Costco deal were among several new offerings that the company announced at its annual product event in New York on Wednesday. Moshe, you were there. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so they sort of had like an upfront equivalent over at Uber. They've done this for a couple of years now where they roll out some of these new features. And it's also an opportunity to get media there. And one of their big focuses is obviously, as any major company, how do they sustain growth? What are their new offerings as gross bookings have been moderating? So they are trying these lower priced options. They are offering this major college student discount to get people in young. They are trying to... And they're trying to, take a look at ways that they can give you a discount, but also bring you in with these shuttles and the group service. And so they're going to test that out. I also think the caregiver feature is notable, Jill, because, there's a lot of older Americans who need medical care, but a huge impediment for them is how do they get to the doctor, get to the medical facility. So by trying to make that easier and more affordable and working with insurance companies, they're hoping, they can both grow the service, but also help people at the same time. All right, so that's that. Now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1866. On this day, Congress passed legislation calling for a new 5-cent piece composed of nickel and copper. The currency became known as the nickel, of course. It wasn't always worth 5 cents. In 1865, it was actually a 3-cent coin. Eventually becomes 5 cents. Fun fact, calling it a nickel is actually misleading because they're actually made up of 75% copper. The copper doesn't have the same ring to it, though, Jill.
I was going to say.
All right, on this day in history, in 1929, the first Academy Awards were held. 12 categories, 270 people attended. It only lasted 15 minutes. Oh, those were the days when the Oscars lasted 15 minutes.
A show after my own heart.
Tickets at that time, $5. On this day in 1965, SpaghettiOs were introduced. Happy birthday, SpaghettiOs. A year later.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs.
Do they still use that theme song? Iconic from our youth.
Don't know. I still do.
Given where grocery prices are, Jill, we're all going to be eating SpaghettiOs soon. All right, a bit of music and pop culture history. On this date in 1966, God Only Knows by the Beach Boys was released as part of their masterwork, Pet Sounds, still one of the greatest albums of all time. And we end here as promised. On this day in 1986, Top Gun was released in theaters. Tom Cruise becomes a household name. But Jill, did you know that John Travolta was initially approached for the central role of Maverick?
I did not, and I am glad that Tom Cruise got the part. Was there a reason he couldn't take it?
Travolta wanted too much money. Apparently, he was driving a hard bargain. At some point, the producers were like, he's not worth it. He's also had all these flops because he had Saturday Night Fever and Grease, and there's a bunch of Travolta movies in the early 80s that didn't do very well. So at some point, the producers were like, we're going to go with the new guy. But before they went with Cruise, who else did they consider for Maverick? The following people. Now imagine Top Gun with the following people. Michael J. Fox as Maverick. Matthew Broderick as Maverick. Sean Penn. Scott Baio. Tom Hanks as Maverick. John Cusack, Nick Cage, Emilio Estevez, Patrick Swayze. All of these men were all considered for Maverick. And apparently, Tom Cruise was then approached, and even he was like, I don't know if I want this. And they put him up in a plane, and apparently it was so amazing. He gets off the plane. He's like, I'm in. Now, interestingly, we won't just stop with Maverick here. Iceman, Val Kilmer, apparently didn't want to participate in the movie initially because he thought it was warmongering. He's a pacifist. And so he thought it was like too rah military. And so at that point, Val Kilmer did not want to be a part of it. And apparently that was an issue for some of these actors as well.
So just back to the names of some of the people who could have played Maverick. Patrick Swayze, Emilio Estevez, Matthew Broderick, Sean Penn, Michael J. Fox, Tom Hanks. I love Tom Cruise, and at this point he is Maverick.
Right.
But those names I think could have done a pretty good job. It would have been a different movie, but I think that they would have been great.
Swayze, Cage, Fox, Penn.
Cage, I don't know.
I don't know about Tom Hanks. Well, maybe. I don't know.
He's too nice.
He's too nice. All right. The Mo you know, everybody.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. Will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys. See you tomorrow.